At the will reading, my parents beamed as the attorney slid a $10 million check across the table to Vanessa. Then they looked at me and said, "Go make your own." I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. I just fixed my gaze on the polished wood, pretending I couldn't hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then the atmosphere shifted. An elderly man in a gray suit rose to his feet. "There's one more document," he announced, unfolding a faded envelope marked with my grandfather's handwriting. My mother's grin faltered. My father's hand twitched. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. That single envelope appended everything. It was the spark that would unravel every carefully built lie they had crafted. And it led back to a place I hadn't seen in over a year. My grandfather's ranch, just outside Charleston. Once, the wind there had carried comfort. Now, it whispered of buried secrets. I hadn't set foot on that land since the spring before he died. It was strange how something once so familiar could suddenly feel foreign. The gravel crunched beneath my boots as I stepped from the car. Wind chimes on the porch, once the soundtrack of summer afternoons and sweet tea steeping on the windowsill, now rang hollow, like echoes of something lost. I hesitated before knocking. The door's white paint was still chipped. The magnolia trees still leaned eastward just a little too far. Yet somehow, the place no longer felt like mine. When the door creaked open, I half expected silence. Instead, I heard, "So, you finally decided to show up." My grandmother's voice was the same, sharp enough to slice glass. Her arms folded, her jaw clenched like stone. I froze, searching her face for warmth, relief, maybe even confusion. But there was nothing, only ice. "Grandma, what's going on?" I asked, stepping forward. "They told me you were too busy, that you didn't want to be bothered, that you'd moved on with a new life." Her voice wavered, then hardened. "Your grandfather called for you, Claire. Every day on his deathbed. He begged for you." I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. "That's not true. I tried to call. I came in March. Vanessa was here. She told me no one was home." Her eyes narrowed. "We were here. We were always here." A heavy silence hung between us. Then, without a word, she turned and disappeared into the house. I followed, the air inside thick and suffocating, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. She returned carrying a battered leather notepad. "This is the number he kept dialing," she said, placing it in my hands. I recognized his handwriting immediately, blocky, neat, with the faintest slant. But the number written wasn't mine. "Grandma, this isn't my number. Not even close. I've had the same phone since college." Her brows furrowed, her gaze fixed on the page. "They told us you changed it, that you didn't want to be found, that you were ashamed of us." "No," I said, stumbling back toward the wall for support. "They lied. They cut me off from you on purpose." Her hands began to shake. She lowered herself into the worn floral armchair by the fireplace, her knees buckling beneath her. "They told me the funeral was at noon," I whispered. "I showed up, but the church was empty." Her face went pale. "The service was at 9, she said softly. "They told everyone you didn't come, that you didn't care." My breath caught in my chest. I would never have missed his funeral. Never. The silence that followed was unbearable, pressing in from every corner. My chest constricted, vision blurring, and I sank beside her, clutching her hand like a child. "I didn't know," I whispered. "I didn't even know he was sick until it was too late." Her voice softened, her hand brushing over mine. "We know the truth now. That's what matters. We know." We sat there in the heavy quiet. It wasn't awkward. It was thick with all the words left unspoken. The old clock on the mantel ticked louder than I ever remembered. Outside, the wind stirred, sweeping brittle leaves across the porch like unsettled memories. At last, Grandma rose to her feet. Her hands trembled faintly, yet there was a fierce spark in her eyes I hadn't witnessed in years. "I'm calling them," she declared. "Calling who?" I asked. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she walked to the old rotary phone mounted on the kitchen wall, the same one Grandpa had always refused to replace, and began to dial. Each turn of the dial clicked with weight and finality, like punctuation marking the end of a long unfinished sentence. I watched her fingers, thin from age but steady with determination. When the call connected, her voice turned sharp, clipped. "Betty, I need you, Jacob and Vanessa here. Right now." A muffled objection came through the line, but Grandma silenced it. "No, it can't wait. You'll be here within the hour." She hung up without a goodbye and turned to me. "The lawyer's coming, too." I blinked. "Grandpa's lawyer?" She nodded. "Yes, your grandfather left instructions, very specific ones. They're to be read only when everyone is gathered. And that's exactly what we're going to do." I didn't speak, I didn't need to. I simply nodded. For the next hour, I sat at the small kitchen table, running my finger along its worn edge. The same table where Grandpa had once sipped his morning coffee while reading the scientific journals I mailed him from college. The same place where he asked about my bee communication study. The same spot where I once told him I wanted to explore plant memory, and he hadn't laughed. I glanced around the kitchen. The same curtains hung. The same old refrigerator hummed. Yet the air felt different, heavy. Footsteps creaked across the porch. The doorbell rang. Grandma rested her hand lightly on my shoulder. "Stay here. I'll call you when it's time." From the kitchen, I listened as they arrived one by one. My mother's overly sweet voice. "Oh my goodness, it still smells exactly the same in here." My father's calm, measured tone. I thought this was already settled. Vanessa's impatient sigh. "Really? This couldn't wait until after the estate was processed." Then silence, and Grandma's voice, colder than I'd ever heard it. "Please sit. Mr. Harold Keene will arrive shortly. He'll be reading Walter's final instructions." I could picture their faces, puzzled, uneasy, mildly annoyed. They had no idea I was here. No idea what was about to unfold. Neither did I. But deep down, I wished that for once someone would speak aloud what I had always felt in my bones, that what they did wasn't love. That silence, exclusion, and manipulation weren't accidents. They were deliberate choices. The front door creaked again. A new voice entered, calm, professional. The lawyer. "This won't take long," he said. "But it must be done properly." That was my signal. Grandma's voice called out, "Claire, come in now." I stood, heart pounding, and stepped through the kitchen doorway into the living room. 3 pairs of eyes snapped toward me, their expressions unraveling instantly. My mother's smile froze. My father's jaw clenched. Vanessa's face drained of color. The air crackled like static. Their shock wasn't just surprise, it was fear. All 3 stared at me. My mother blinked as though seeing a ghost. My father tugged at his collar, a nervous habit I hadn't seen in years. Vanessa's lips parted, but no words came. She looked as if someone had torn the script from her hands mid-performance. I stood tall. If they expected me to shrink, they'd be disappointed. Grandma motioned toward an empty chair across from them. I sat slowly, steadying my breath. Mr. Keene gave me a polite, unreadable nod, then opened his leather briefcase. He drew out a thick manila envelope. "This," he began, "is the last will and testament of Walter R. Whitman, prepared and sealed at his request. Alongside the legal documents, he has included a handwritten letter to be read aloud." The room went still. No one said a word. He cleared his throat before speaking. "To my wife, Margaret Whitman," he began. Grandma didn't so much as flinch. "I leave the family ranch, the house, and enough funds for her care and comfort. She knows where to find the rest." He turned the page. "To my granddaughter, Claire Whitman." The air in the room seemed to shrink, heavy with tension. "I leave the Whitman Research Annex at 317 Laurel Creek Road, Charleston, along with all laboratory equipment, financial accounts, current research patents, and any intellectual property registered under Whitman Innovation." A sharp intake of breath, this one not mine. My mother's eyes darted toward Vanessa. I kept my hands folded neatly in my lap. Mr. Keene continued smoothly. "And lastly, the remainder of my estate, financial assets, stocks, and retirement funds shall be split equally between my 2 granddaughters, Claire and Vanessa Whitman." That was it. A quiet detonation disguised as words. The shock wave came a moment later. Vanessa shot upright, her chair screeching across the floor. "What?" she snapped. Her voice cracked with fury. "He gave her the annex?" "The entire facility." Her tone broke, raw with disbelief. That's insane. You promised me. She pointed at our parents, trembling with rage. You told me it would all be mine. That if I just kept visiting, if I smiled and acted sweet, everything would come to me. My father's jaw tightened, silent. My mother stared at the floor as though wishing it would swallow her whole. I stayed still, watching it all collapse. Mr. Keene raised his hand gently. There is more. Mr. Whitman also left a personal letter addressed to Claire, with instructions that it be read aloud here, in front of the family. Vanessa let out a bitter laugh, but no one joined her. Grandma reached into a drawer and handed over a folded letter. He wrote this a week before he passed, she said quietly. He made me promise. The lawyer opened it carefully, cautious with the creased paper. The handwriting sprawled across the page, bold, steady, unmistakably Grandpa's. To my dearest Claire, Mr. Keene began. If you are hearing this, it means I am no longer beside you. But my faith in you endures, stronger than ever. The words washed over me like a warm breeze through an open window. You were always the quiet one, the observer, the thinker, the one who asked why when no one else cared to. Vanessa sank back into her chair. My mother twisted her fingers nervously. My father stared out the window. You built your truth in a family that never cared to honor it, the letter continued. Something shifted inside me. Not anger, not vengeance, but recognition. You were never a mistake, Claire. You were the legacy I cherished most. Tears blurred my sight, but I refused to look away. I wanted every word heard. Mr. Keene's voice carried evenly, though the weight of each phrase pressed into the room. I saw you clutching that little notebook at 7, timing raindrops filling a glass. I saw your face brighten when you discovered patterns where others saw only noise. My chest tightened. I remembered that notebook. I still had it. I saw how your joy dimmed when your mother brushed you aside. How your father changed the subject whenever you shared what you were proud of. My mother inhaled sharply, but I kept my eyes forward. Vanessa was easier for them. She shone in ways they understood. But you, Claire, you glowed in a language they refused to learn. Instead of listening, they shut you out. Vanessa crossed her arms tightly, shifting uncomfortably. I don't fault her completely. She played the role they handed her. But you wrote your own. And that takes courage. A tear rolled down my cheek. I let it fall. I remember when you won your first science fair and begged me to hide the trophy. You said, maybe if they don't see it, they'll stop looking at me like I don't belong here. A ragged breath came from across the room, perhaps my father's. You deserve celebration, Claire, not invisibility. I can't undo the pain, but I can give you something that is yours alone. A place to build freely without apology, without their shadows. Mr. Keene folded the letter slowly. The silence that followed was thick, heavy with memory, resentment, and a sudden, undeniable clarity. I cleared my throat. I remember that science fair, I said softly. Mom didn't come. She was at Vanessa's dress rehearsal. Vanessa flinched. I came home holding that trophy like it was a sin. Dad finally spoke. Claire, this isn't the time to dig up the past. No, I said sharply. This is the only time. Because all I ever heard from either of you was, why can't you be more like your sister? I turned to Vanessa. And from you. Every time I felt proud, you twisted it into a threat. She scoffed. Oh, please. You always made yourself the victim. I worked for what I had. I nodded. You mean you visited Grandpa when it suited you? Smiled when told to. Played the part because you thought it would pay off. Her jaw tightened. And what? You think you're better? You vanished for years. No, I snapped. I was erased. You told Grandma I didn't want to see her. You gave Grandpa a fake number, so I'd never get his messages. That wasn't distance, it was sabotage. My mother suddenly stood, her voice sharp. Enough, Claire. You're twisting everything. This family has endured enough. This family, Grandma cut in, her voice fierce, has been living a lie. And I allowed it for far too long. My mother froze, stunned. Mother, don't. Grandma's voice cut through the silence. I watched all of you ignore Claire's pain. I believed you when you insisted she didn't care. I should have known better. My father shifted uneasily in his chair. Look, Claire got her schooling, the science camps, the travel. That all costs money. No, I replied. It wasn't free, but you didn't pay a cent, Grandpa did. Every single expense. The scholarships he tracked down for me, the flights, the journals. Half the time you didn't even know where I was. My throat tightened. You made me feel like I was a burden. He made me feel like I mattered. Vanessa shot up from her seat. This is absurd. I was promised everything. I stayed. I was the good daughter. No, I said, steady and calm. You were the performer, the chosen one. I was the hidden one. But Grandpa never forgot me. And now, you don't get to erase me anymore. Vanessa's face twisted with rage. Why should you get anything? Just because you're some gloomy little genius in a lab coat? I allowed a faint smile. No, I get something because I earned his love honestly. That's what you never understood. Love isn't an act. Grandma rose slowly, walking to the center of the room. Though her steps were measured, her resolve was unshaken. I regret that Walter left you anything, she said firmly, fixing her gaze on Vanessa. You may have played the part, but it was never love. It was a transaction, and I'm ashamed I didn't see it sooner. She turned to face them all. Leave. You're not welcome here. My mother gasped. Mother. Out, Grandma said again, her voice sharp. Now. At first no one moved. Then Vanessa snatched her bag and stormed out, her heels cracking against the floor like gunfire. My parents trailed after, muttering about lawyers, dazed and bitter. For the first time in my life, they couldn't take anything with them. The door clicked shut. No slam, just finality. I stood frozen, uncertain of what to feel. The air in the room was different, still unburdened, free. Grandma walked past me and lowered herself onto the couch. Her trembling hands, moments ago unsteady, now lay quietly in her lap. They'll come back, I whispered. They always do. Maybe, she said softly. But this time we don't have to let them in. Her words sank slowly into me. For years, I had lived under an unspoken contract. If I achieved enough, if I proved myself useful, if I excelled, maybe then I would be seen. Maybe they would call me daughter, sister, family without hesitation. But standing there with my grandfather's memory still heavy in the air, I finally understood something painfully simple. I had been trying to earn love from people who had none to give. Grandpa had seen that long before I did. I need some air, I murmured. Grandma nodded, and I stepped out onto the back porch. The boards groaned beneath my weight, a sound that once meant home. Now it meant change. The magnolia trees still bloomed in the corner. Beyond the fence stretched the red dirt field where Grandpa had let me build my first greenhouse kit. It collapsed after 2 weeks, but he called it a perfect disaster. We laughed about it for years. I thought of that 10-year-old girl, knees muddy, eyes glowing, and wondered how long she had been buried under expectations that weren't her own. When I came back inside, Grandma had a kettle on the stove. Her movements were slower now, but precise. You know, she said quietly, Walter started planning that research annex 5 years ago, before he even got sick. I turned, startled. He told me he wanted you to have a place where you didn't need permission just to be yourself. The tears came gently, silent, steady, not shaking. Just release. That night, I stayed in my old room for the first time in years. The wallpaper had faded, the mattress sagged, but the ceiling still glowed with the stars Grandpa had helped me stick up when I was 9. I'd made him place them in scientifically accurate constellations. He hadn't questioned it once. Lying there, I realized something new. The house no longer felt haunted. It felt reclaimed. The next morning, I brewed coffee for both of us and carried it to the kitchen table, the same one I used to avoid whenever my parents visited. Grandma folded her newspaper and offered me a weary but warm smile. So what now? She asked. I think I'll go see it, I said. The annex. The lab. She nodded. He liked that. I looked out the window. Sunlight spilled softly through the magnolia branches. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the urge to run or prove or explain. I didn't feel invisible. And that more than money, more than any inheritance, was the first real gift my family had ever given me. The only person who ever truly believed in me didn't just leave behind a legacy. He left me permission to start over. When I first laid eyes on the annex, I didn't see a laboratory. It looked like an old barn someone had patched up, and that's exactly what it was. Tucked away at the end of a dusty trail off Laurel Creek, the place stood with wide wooden beams, a tin roof, and heavy double doors that looked more fitting for horses than for science. But stepping inside was like crossing into another world. The space had been completely transformed. Along the east wall, glass panes flooded the room with morning sunlight. Work tables stood ready, holding pristine lab equipment, microscopes, centrifuges, data tablets, even a 3D printer still sealed in plastic. Shelves stacked with unopened boxes carried my name. At the very center was a workbench. Resting on top of it lay my childhood notebook, the one I was sure I had lost back in college. Its pages were ripped, handwriting messy, and filled with clumsy sketches of honeybee communication systems. My legs nearly buckled. Grandpa hadn't simply built me a lab. He had built a sanctuary for my mind. Over the next few weeks, I made the annex my home. I brought in 2 graduate students, Tara and Micah, old classmates who carried the same stubborn belief that science could still hold humanity at its core. We began with small projects, a local grant for microirrigation research, then a collaboration with a regional farming co-op testing sustainable crop rotations. We stumbled plenty, burned out equipment, shed tears over rejected grants and failed data models. But we kept coming back. Each morning I unlocked the doors to a place that didn't demand I justify who I was. A place where ideas weren't mocked, they were tested. A place where being too intense, too quiet, or too curious wasn't something to apologize for. One evening, after yet another crushing funding rejection, I stayed behind while the others went home. The annex was dim and silent. Sitting on the floor beside the storage closet, surrounded by crumpled printouts and empty coffee cups, I pulled Grandpa's letter from my bag, the one I begged Mr. Keene to let me keep. I unfolded it, read the line I'd memorized 100 times, and whispered it into the quiet. You wrote your own role. It wasn't just encouragement. It was instruction. That same night, I drafted a new proposal, not for irrigation, but for a youth science program in rural schools. A program for kids like me. Quiet, curious, overlooked. We called it the Little Scientist Initiative. The first year, we worked with just 12 students. They came from towns where textbooks were outdated and where no one had ever rolled a microscope into a classroom. We handed each child a leather-bound notebook, replicas of mine, with Grandpa's words stamped inside the first page. Write the things they don't understand. One day the world will. That fall, a shy girl named Amber, barely 13, hair always covering her eyes, showed me pages filled with her own observations of bee behavior. Her math was clumsy, her grammar chaotic, but her mind was brilliant. When I told her that, she stared at me as if I had handed her a whole world. You actually read it, she whispered. I smiled. Of course I did. And in that instant, I understood. This wasn't about replacing what I'd lost. It was about planting something new in richer soil and watching it grow without fear. 3 years after Grandpa's will was read, I received an email from a lawyer, not Mr. Keene, but someone representing Vanessa Whitman. The subject line was brief, request for visit. Claire Whitman Innovation Annex. I braced for conflict, another challenge to the will, another attempt to reopen the past. But when Vanessa arrived, I hardly recognized her. The designer heels and perfect hair were gone. She wore no makeup, only a navy coat hanging too loosely on her shoulders. She entered slowly, as though afraid of taking up space. I stood beneath Grandpa's portrait in the reception area. She paused when she saw it. He always knew who you were, she murmured, even when I didn't, especially when I didn't. For a moment, I didn't know how to answer. I just nodded. I'd like to see it, she said. The lab, the work, what you've made of it. I could have turned her away, but I didn't. I walked her through everything, the greenhouse wings, the crop development rooms, the student wall lined with photos from the Little Scientist Initiative. She asked no grand questions, only quiet ones. How is all this funded? What does this machine do? Do the students get to publish their findings? When we reached the community garden where families harvested food grown with our methods, she stopped. Children pulled lettuce from the soil. A mother and son laughed by the compost bins. A father tested moisture levels with one of our field kits. Vanessa's voice broke. I don't expect you to forgive me. I said nothing. I just wanted to see what he built for you, and what you've built with it. She didn't cry, but her hands fidgeted constantly, tugging her sleeves, tracing invisible shapes against the railing. I let her stay as long as she wished. No lectures, no bitterness, just truth. We don't speak often, but twice a year Vanessa volunteers at the youth science camp. She coaches students on presentation skills, teaching them how to explain complicated ideas simply, how to stand tall in front of a crowd. The kids adore her. Some call her Coach V. At the end of her first summer, she handed me a folder. I wrote a communication guide for the shy kids, she said quietly, almost embarrassed. Maybe it'll help. Later that night, I read it. It wasn't flawless, but it was gentle, thoughtful, and real. For the first time, I saw a version of my sister that didn't frighten me. She's never apologized with words, but she shows up. And that's more than I ever imagined. Maybe, just maybe, it's enough. We're not sisters in the way others might define it. But in this small corner of the world Grandpa dreamed into existence, we've stopped pretending. And that feels like the beginning of something true. It's been 6 years since the will was read. 6 years since the front door slammed behind my parents and Vanessa, their footsteps fading down the porch like the end of a play no one clapped for. I haven't spoken to my parents since. Their names pop up in charity newsletters and financial reports from Florida, where they retired. I don't hate them, but I don't miss them either. What I think about instead is the work. The annex has grown beyond anything I once imagined. From that single barn, it has become a full research campus for labs, 3 greenhouses, and over 60 acres of trial fields. We've developed drought-resistant seeds feeding thousands across the South, where traditional crops fail. We've shared research with universities in Kenya and Brazil, expanding the reach of regenerative agriculture. Just last month, I stood on a stage in San Francisco accepting a national award for climate innovation. Under the bright lights, I didn't flinch. I wore a navy suit with Grandpa's pocket watch tucked inside the breast pocket, the one Grandma gave me last year, initials fading but still clear. Inside the lid sat a tiny photo, me at 10, standing proudly beside my honeybee communication display, smiling ear to ear. He carried it with him every day, Grandma told me. Now it rests on my desk at the annex, where morning sunlight scatters across my notes. Some days I talk to him, not with words, but in the quiet. When experiments fail. When a student wins a scholarship. When I remember how close I came to believing I didn't matter. He never let me vanish. Not really. And now I see why. Legacy isn't a monument. It's a map. One built from choices, kindness, and small anchors left behind for someone else to follow when the world tries to erase them. These days, Grandma lives in a small apartment attached to my house in town. She's slower now, more forgetful, but still sharper than anyone I know when it counts. Every morning we drink coffee in the sunroom, and she shares stories about Grandpa I never heard before. How he planted a tree just to propose. How he believed soil could remember kindness. How he always knew I would return. Maybe he was right. Maybe I had to leave to understand what coming back really meant. Some evenings, I walked to the far edge of the annex fields, past the solar irrigation plots and children's gardens, to the old wooden bench Grandpa built by hand. From there, the stars stretched wide above me. Not the glow-in-the-dark ones I once stuck to my bedroom ceiling, but the real ones. And still, they remind me of the girl I used to be, the one who kept asking why even when no one cared to answer, the one who refused to be silent, the one he believed in. And on nights like that, when the wind stirs just right through the trees, I swear I can hear his voice in the rustling leaves. Write the things they don't understand. One day the world will. And now it finally does.